Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and welcome to the Inner Voice Show, part of the Evolving Mind series in the Togetherness media. This is a show about what matters most in our life, our mind, thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. I will share with you the latest research about using electronic media while doing schoolwork negatively impacting learning. Many students believe they're immune to any ill effect because they're good multitaskers, according to the recent research. In this show, I'll bring you Hunter Clarke-Field, a mindfulness mentor, host of the Mindful Mama podcast, creator of the Mindful Parenting online course, and the author of the new book, Raising Good Humans. And then I'll bring you Hersch Wilson, a volunteer firefighter and the author of Firefighter Zen, a field guide to thriving in tough times. We have an amazing conversation with together with both of the authors, so I hope you enjoy it. I love hearing from you, so connect with me through my website, foojan.com, and follow all of my social media and message me with your comments and topics of interest. I'd love to hear from you. But first, the tip of the week. This has been really interesting week. I've been witnessing an array of different reactions to similar events. I've worked with people who've gotten their abnormal radiology test and have panicked and seen the worst possible scenario. And others who've gotten the same abnormal results have not blinked. I have talked to people who've been infected by COVID-19 and had mild symptoms, and yet panicked, and have worked with clients who were in the hospital for the COVID, and yet were calm through the process. I've seen people who have lost their jobs and can't sleep at night, and I've seen people who have lost their whole business and are working through it systematically. What is the internal dialogue which creates high levels of anxiety for some people and takes them to the point of panic and paralyzation versus others who work through the process with a sense of calmness? There's a negative and catastrophic way of thinking when faced with events in life and feed anxiety and fear. Usually, people visualize the worst case scenario and stay right at the edge of the fear. This way, they attempt to continuously scare themselves as if they are watching a horror film that never ends. This puts a toll on the person's physiology and runs them down emotionally and physically. Others will face illness or divorce, death in the family, an accident, a loss of job, or something that happens in their life which is really hard with a solution focused mentality. Now, this does not mean that they don't go through fear, anxiety, anger, sadness, or any of the range of emotions. They certainly will have their range of emotions. They will feel it, but allow themselves to obtain information, assess all the information, check their fear with the reality of what's really happening, check their fear about the future with the reality of what's possible in the future, talk to people who have gone through a similar experience, and then create a game plan about how to overcome all that has happened to them. So, how can we overcome our intense emotions first and then look at what can be done? I've got 10 tips for you. So, one, acknowledge the unfortunate event that has happened. Two, identify and name the feeling or multiple feelings that have triggered in you. Three, recognize the thought process that triggers those particular feelings. Four, check your thinking about the event with the reality of what actually has happened. Five, check with others around you and see how they see the event. They see it your way, or maybe they have another perspective, which will be a fresh perspective for you. Six, check with others who have survived an event similar to yours and learn how they have overcome it. Seven, visualize how you would like this event to turn out. Make sure it is based on reality and not a fantasy. Eight, create an action plan to get from where you are to where you visualize to get. Nine, identify and name your emotions now while you're visualizing the end result. And 10, write down or create a collage of where you like to end up if and when it's all solved. you will find your strength, your skills, and resilience to work through all that life will bring forward. May life bring you what you can handle, and may you handle all that life brings you. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with the latest research. Welcome to the latest research. Scanning social media while listening to a lecture, watching a favorite television series while studying. Today's young people frequently juggle multiple streams of information and entertainment media while doing schoolwork, a trend that researchers call distracted learning. And while numerous researchers found that simultaneous use of electronic devices has a significant detrimental impact on learning, many students shrug off warnings about the negative consequences because they consider themselves such a good multitaskers. And that's what Professor Shelley J. Smith of the University of Illinois stated in a paper published in the Journal of Food Science Education. So, Dr. Smith reviewed recent studies on distracted learning and suggested strategies to help students stay engaged and on task. And I'm sure all of you who are working with your children at home, whether your parents or school teachers, would probably like this research because you know, you're feeling it, you know what's going on with your kids. While some faculty members restrict or ban students' unsanctioned use of cell phones and other devices in the classroom, these policies can be difficult for instructors to enforce, actually, and cast technology as the enemy. Banning technology use in the classroom suggests to our students that they are children who cannot learn to appropriately handle it, rather than young adults that we're helping them to grow into professionals. In a world where distractions abound, we have a golden opportunity to help our students and ourselves learn how to control our actions and focus on what really matters. Learning how to become less distractible is an essential and timeless skill for success in education, as well as many other facets of life. Whilst it's virtually impossible to make students limit all distractions in class or outside, teachers and parents can encourage youth to develop an internal locus of control, the attitude that they have control over the situation and their success or failure is a result of the effort they invest in their own education. So, armed with the internal locus of control, students are able to recognize and control factors that impede their success, such as distractions while they're trying to learn. Researchers in psychology, cognitive sciences, and neuroscience found that media multitasking during schoolwork interferes with students' attention and working memory. We all knew that, didn't we? Students' learning is a shallower and spottier. They understand less and have difficulty recalling what they have learned and applying it in new contexts. Their reading, comprehension, and note-taking ability, test performance, and grade point averages all diminish. Listening to a lecture, texting, online shopping, and socializing on Facebook or TikTok, Instagram, any of them are all complex, very demanding tasks that draw on the same region of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Under most conditions, the brain can't carry out two complex tasks simultaneously. But if students do not believe their learning is being hampered by this behavior, they have no incentive or motivation to change it. And the problem just continues. Some researchers suggest that mobile devices can exacerbate a form of social anxiety called the fear of missing out, that compels people to interrupt their studies and work projects constantly to read and respond to social media posts and messages, negatively affecting their performance when working on projects that require sustained concentration. Dr. Smith said, intentionally removing extraneous devices from the workspaces can help people limit distractions and resist the urge to respond to every buzz or ping emitted by their phone. Another strategy for limiting interruptions and managing one's time is using a work reward system. For example, a student would commit to studying without distractions for a defined period, such as 25 minutes, then reward himself with the 5 minutes of social media use. Or they could limit their web surfing or social media usage to the time of the day when they're least productive. Alternating intensive periods of focused work with pre-planned bursts of pleasure helps alleviate boredom, one of the primary reasons people turn into digital media to begin with. Likewise, fostering a work hard, play hard mindset encourages young people to focus exclusively on their schoolwork when they are supposed to be learning and devote the same attention to recreational activities when it's time to play. Moreover, people can improve their ability to focus on tasks with activities that boost brain function and enhance cognitive control, particularly physical exercise. So, exercise has been shown to be enormous benefit to both cognitive functioning and well-being, including mental health. So, teachers could incorporate movement in the classroom, and parents, you could do that at home, having them move around, pair up with your other children, go on brief walk indoors or outdoors to discuss the concepts of the day's class. Dr. Schmidt suggested that promoting active learning in a classroom can help teachers keep students engaged with the course content, so they're less inclined to turn to their smartphones for stimulation. For example, teachers might encourage students to set goals related to their academic performance or to develop course content on topics of their choosing and teach it to other students, strengthening their investment in their learning and deepening their understanding of the subject matter. I hope that was helpful for all of you, even parents who are home and acting as substitute teachers at this time. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I have Hunter Clarke-Fields with me. She is a mindfulness mentor, host of the Mindful Mama podcast, and creator of the Mindful Parenting online courses, and author of the new book, Raising Good Humans. She helps parents bring more calm into their daily lives, and I know you guys all need it, and cooperations in their family. Hunter has over 20 years of experience in meditation and yoga practices and has taught mindfulness to the thousands and thousands in the worldwide. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Foojan. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Hunter, I know that mindfulness is really taking on the world, is becoming really in the mainstream, and it's beautiful. So let's talk about mindfulness itself first. So for people who are with us, they get, what do we mean by mindfulness? Because I think people have different ideas about what mindfulness might mean.
You know, I like to think of mindfulness as like this, like thousands of year old brain hack that parents really need, especially parents. We all need, but parents especially, because it's this way to sort of do something that's a little anti-instinctual, right? Our instincts lead us to survive and kind of lead us to some anxiety and things like that. And mindfulness practices help us to really counter that. So it's kind of like a little hack in the brain that helps us to sort of calm our nervous system, helps us to lower our reactivity. And then that in turn helps us see everything more clearly, react to our children more thoughtfully, etc. But if we look at exactly what is mindfulness, it's kind of a simple thing and it feels a little woo-woo, but it actually has some real, like real physical biological changes that happen in the brain, which is really cool. But anyway, it's this a practice of intentionally putting our attention in the present moment on, you know, be it breath or thoughts or feelings or whatever's happening in the present moment. And very importantly, with an attitude of kindness and curiosity, right? So we're not judging ourselves. And this is very different from the way we normally are, because we're kind of normally like one step ahead, planning in the future. What are we going to be doing next? We're going, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And this is really about intentionally practicing to put our attention in the here and the now.
And it's so important because when we're talking about parenting, so a couple of things happens, right? At the same time, You are supposed to be taking care of your children's best interest. You're thinking about 20 years later at every moment that they're doing something, because you want to make sure that you're a great parent and you do everything right. And then you get triggered because they're doing something and you can't handle it anymore, and you want to scream and yell, and secretly you probably just want to run away, but you can't because you got to be there. And they trigger you like hell, and they've done it so many times. And with all of that happening simultaneously,
Mm.
how to be present in that moment and do the role modeling of everything that you say you want to do, and do the conscious parenting.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because the way it's, people aren't really sure how mindfulness practice works, but like what I've seen in my clients and in my own life is that it really helps us to kind of interrupt that rumination spiral where we're like, oh, this is happening, so therefore X, Y, Z, and are you just the way you just described how our brains go down the line until our child is on the street when they're 15, right? So it helps us to stop that spiral and say, okay, right now I'm getting triggered. Right now I'm feeling these things. What's real with my child right now? What's really real right now? So it gives us this ability to have a little bit of clarity of thought. So normally we're kind of in our thoughts, and our thoughts are kind of like a waterfall. Like our brain thinks the way our ears hear, right? Our brain is just thinking all day long. And we're in the waterfall of those thoughts, and we just believe all of them. We're under the waterfall. We're in the waterfall. And after a little bit of time with a mindfulness practice, a couple months with a mindfulness practice, it allows us to kind of step out in front of that waterfall and say, oh, okay, I'm having this thought that, if I'm a terrible parent, that my child's going to be delinquent if I do this here, that this is unacceptable, all of these things. And it starts to help us kind of get a sense of perspective on those moments. And maybe not always in that moment, but it really does help us get perspective. And it does help us in that moment kind of walk back that cycle of reactivity, that sort of triggers of reactivity.
So part of what I'm sensing, if we're going on an autopilot, and we're doing things, and then we're busy, and then our child does something, and it triggers us immediately. Because I think most of the time, many of the parents, if they are in a calm position, they're really paying attention to their children and all of that, it's easier for them to take the concept of, all right, let me focus on here and now. I think a lot of times parents also get bogged down because they're completely into something else, like they're working with another child, or they're making they're working, or they're making food for their children. They're doing another task that they really have to pay attention to. And then suddenly, aren't we great at multitasking? Suddenly something else happens with the child, and we have to shift to look. And so we're coming with all of this autopilot concepts that are happening with us, right? And what I'm hearing from you is like, first we got to stop. Like, instead of instantly acting on whatever the impulse says that we have to act, is stop and say, what's happening here? And there's an assessment that needs to happen with the here and now about then how to be. So the one is stop, assess what's going on, and then come back to the inside of you to be able to consciously go toward the skills that you actually want to role model for your children. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember feeling like I would hear this advice, right? To like just stop and pause and then start to, and that's where the crucial piece is, where there's a practice piece where it's what's happening with the nervous system, right? Is that the nervous system, as stressors add on, the nervous system is kind of that fight, flight, or freeze response is happening, right? And our blood is boiling, we're getting stressed, and our cups are full, and it just, what's happening in that moment is that it becomes so that we're unable to stop that reactivity. It becomes like it's an instantaneous biological response. That losing it response is this instantaneous biological response. No one chooses it, right? No one's like, please, I'd like to losing at my child today. No, thank you, right? But it's this instantaneous thing. So how do we stop? That really becomes the question. And that's the work that we do in the mindful parenting course and in Raising Good Humans, is talking about how do we actually get to that? Because I remember saying, well, how do I respond skillfully? How do I get to that place when I'm losing it? And it really is about, there's sort of two places we need to go with that. And that is like, we have to kind of take a long-term approach, right? Of like lowering our overall reactivity through practice, in daily, regular practice. And we have to kind of look at that, at practicing kind of in that moment, looking at that moment and seeing how can we kind of, before we get to that point of losing it, start to interrupt that cycle by naming and acknowledging what's happening in the present moment as we're leading up to it. So say you're a parent and you're starting to like, find you're losing it and you're like, they told me to stay calm. Foojan and Hunter told me to stay calm. So I'm calm. And they're like, oh, and I'm fake calm, right? Like we're pretending to be calm. And then we're like, kaboom, and we lose it. And that just doesn't do any good. Instead, actually, if we start to say, you know what, I'm feeling frustrated and overwhelmed right now. That's a wonderful thing to do, because you're acknowledging the reality of this present moment, what's really happening. You're labeling it, and it's a process called sort of name it to tame it that Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, where it actually really like lowers the temperature in the body and helps us to take that step back. So that's kind of in that moment. But the thing about the long-term practice, that point is really important, because you know what, I think about it this way, like those moments that you just described are like they're kind of like the big game for a kid, right? Like you have some child who's in Little League. It's like the Little League World Series for the kid, where you got to like show up, a million things are happening. How are you going to handle it? And you would never put a kid in the Little League's World Series without having them practice, without having them understand the skills and the things they need, without having that muscle memory of practice, right, that they've done. But for us, like we expect ourselves to go into that moment and just be able to stop because we want to. And it just doesn't work that way. Like we have to start to train the brain. And that's where the mindfulness meditation comes in, where it really, it's pretty amazing that the MRI studies have shown that, the brain scan studies have shown that an 8-week course of regular mindfulness practice can actually shrink the amygdala, which is that fight, flight, or freeze center in the brain, and actually grow more thick the prefrontal cortex, which is where that problem solving, verbal ability, empathy, thoughtful, all that higher order thinking is that we need. And so there are these actual like physical changes that happen over time with practice. That's why I call it a brain hack.
Yeah, absolutely. You also have a yell less plan in your book, which is awesome. And you go, systematically in having this idea that not only you have to practice, but you also have to disarm your own triggers, but you have to know what your triggers are and acknowledge them, and then know that what they are and then disarm them, but then also have a plan in action. So it's not like at the moment that you really want to yell, you come up with the plan right then. But if you're practicing, like what you said from before, and when stuff happens, when I really want to yell, what other things can I do in substitution of yelling? So if you practice long enough with that, it seems like at the time that you are needing to be able to take care of yourself, you can. And I see that a lot, when people practice martial arts. They practice martial arts because they want their muscle memory to be there. It's not because they want to go fight, but it's like they want to know how to protect themselves. Many people who take martial arts, they're not fighters. They're not going out there to fight. They're doing it for, self-protection. So how do we do that? We train our muscles to react in a particular way when we need it to. And that's some of the things that I'm sensing also in your book as is happening, is when you practice the mindfulness on your own, when you practice how to recognize and disarm your triggers, when you practice And when you really get agitated and you want to have a different plan, then you're creating a memory within your system, whether it's a neurological memory or a muscle memory. In when the time comes that you want to do this, now you can move into the next level, which is the yell less plan. And then that plan will take you on, because now you're on this path instead of the original path of just getting triggered and, yelling and screaming. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and it really is very physical. It's like what you practice grows stronger. That's that neuroplasticity, and literally like in the brain, there's little pathways, right? They get a little thicker, they get a little more myelinated, right? It's like in the beginning, you just have a path through the woods. You kind of hack that path through the woods with your machete, and then you start walking on it. It gets stronger and stronger and stronger. With the Yell Less plan, you want to think about what are those things that trigger you? How can you kind of prepare for that moment? How can you make a plan to prepare for that moment? One of the things that I like to start people off with that they find really helpful is this idea of yelling skillfully. And I think this is such a helpful concept when we're starting to kind of just say, okay, I want to stop yelling, but how do I do it? But one of the things that we can start with is like yelling skillfully. So we, instead of saying, what's wrong with you? We can say, I feel really frustrated right now, or I feel really angry right now, right? Like, so then we're using an I message. We're just talking about how we feel in that moment, right? So we can start to yell skillfully. But stepping back and kind of doing that Yell Less program, there's a bunch of things that help people calm their nervous system. And I have a bunch of hacks in the book for that. But basically, we want to think about how can we use the mind, how can we use the body and the mind to lower that stress response so that we can respond more skillfully and more from our heart in that moment. So some of the things we can do are so super simple. Deep breathing is cliche because it works, because if we do a longer exhale, it really calms down, puts your body into that soothe and relax response, the opposite of the fight, flight, and freeze response. And just simply taking deep breaths, it shows the nervous system that there's nothing like that you have to be on guard for, right? You're not like, no saber-toothed tiger's coming. But also, like, you can use the mind to lead the body a little bit. So that first example is the body leading the mind, but you can have the mind lead the body. So you can say, you can write this down, and I encourage my clients to like kind of write it down and on a sticky note and put it all over their house. Like, I am helping my child. Telling yourself, I'm helping my child. I'm helping my child. I'm helping my child, right? So hopefully you're in the kitchen, you have your I'm helping my child sticky note up in the cabinet. I'm helping my child, the breathe. And so you start to implement that in some of those moments. Sometimes we have to remove ourselves. It's much more skillful to go hide in the bathroom, splash some cold water on your face, than it is to scream at a 2-year-old, right? It just makes a lot more sense to help yourself calm that down than to lose at your 2-year-old. And then when all of those fail, right? Like those things we're human, we will make mistakes sometimes. You mentioned how as parents, we're all trying to strive for perfection, et cetera. So, what this work in raising good humans, really where it coincides is mindfulness, skillful communication, but also self-compassion. And it's so important for parents, for you to understand that being harsh and mean to yourself, being judgmental and mean to yourself is not going to help you do better next time. It's going to do the opposite. So instead, if you can give yourself a softer landing, if you lose it and you say, oh, I didn't yell skillfully, like Hunter said, and I yelled terrible things to my child. And instead you say, okay, that was hard. Parenting is really, really hard, and I'll try to do better next time. And just some nice, kind words that you would say to a good friend who is suffering. That's such an important piece.
Hunter, in 1 minute, if there's anything we haven't shared and you really, really want everybody who's with us to know, what would that be?
And I guess it would be that self-compassion piece. I try to get it in there because I think it's so, so important because we're in a harsh culture. I think it's important to know for parents to know that parenting isn't instinctual, right? Like it's instinctual around that when our kids are infants and we do have kind of an instinctual bond. But other than that, it's conditioned by your own parents and your culture. So it's not instinctual. It does take practice and effort and investment of time and energy to learn better, more skillful practices that will help you create more cooperative relationships. It doesn't just happen because we hope it will happen. So go and do something about it if this is something that really is important to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Everyone, Hunter Clarke-Fields, please go to mindfulmamamentor.com to find her classes and her podcast and all of it. Thank you so much, Hunter, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Foojan. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. Don't go anywhere, everyone. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach. If you are experiencing anxiety, depression, loneliness, isolation, fear of what's going on with all that's going on in the globe with the coronavirus, what's going to happen to you if you've lost your job and you have a lot of anxiety and you don't know what's going to happen to you and your family, if your kids are at home and you're not used to it and you have no idea how to handle them, if you're working from home and all the structures have changed and you don't really know how to concentrate and restructure and motivate yourself, I'm here for you. Call me and let's have online therapy for anyone who's in California and online coaching for anyone who's in the world. Go to my website, foojan.com, Foojan.com, and let me be a support to you through online therapy and coaching. I'll be looking forward to hearing from you and being a support to you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I have Hersch Wilson with me. He's a volunteer firefighter since 1986. He has worked as an organizational consultant, a pilot, outdoor adventure trainer, a professional dancer. Wow, wow, wow. An author. He writes for Backdraft magazine and other publications. And today we're going to talk about his latest book, Firefighter Zen, a field guide to thriving in tough times. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Firefighting and Zen. I remember reading the book. I read it, the Zen Art of the Motorcycle. Was it that?
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, I don't like motorcycles. I don't, I'm like, no, I'm not going to read that book. And then I read it and it was like, awesome. So to me, that really got me when you said firefighter and Zen. On this one, I was like, of course, like you really have to be in a Zen position to literally voluntarily put yourself into a position of danger, going in all smoke and still you could see everything and come out. So tell us, first of all, what got you to want to write this book for us?
As most things are true in my life, it was my wife Lori's idea.
Good work, Lori. Thank you.
No. And we had both been firefighters, and after about 27 years of doing it, she said, you ought to write about how being a firefighter and an emergency medical technician has really changed how we see life and how we see our family and how we see the world around us. So that was the genesis of the book.
I know that for us who are in California, obviously, we've had the worst fire of ever at this time. And there's a sense of, first of all, there has to be a part of you that is different or has a particular character, whether it come to you or Lori, um, that gets desire to be in this field and volunteer for this field. What do you think is within you that craves for this or yearns or puts yourself into a position of, being in a place of life and death every single minute? Like there's no kidding here. There's life and
Right.
death every minute.
Right. I think it's two things, and I think it evolves. I think as most firefighters begin the profession, they are. It's about the adrenaline. It's about the excitement. It's about the lights and sirens, and it is about probably the reputation of being a firefighter.
Mhm.
As you go on, the adrenaline wears off, and you have to find another motivation. And I think that motivation comes from actually being there to help people and in their some of their worst moments of their lives.
Mhm.
And it's that shift from kind of me-centric of enjoying the adrenaline to other-centric, being there to help other people, that really is the motivating force.
I can see that definitely. To want to continue doing that, you definitely have to go beyond a space of need to really want to be there for others.
Mhm.
So, assuming that you do create a different type of perspective about life issues. Some of us handle life in a different way. For example, somebody might get ill, or even with the fires, people are losing their life and losing their homes and everything. And one person handles it with like, oh, well, I'm just going to move on. And these were just things. And another person, it's all the attachment they have, just lose everything. And they go through a huge grief for many,
Sure.
many years. And sometimes there are things, and sometimes you actually lose a dear one through all of it. What has been your experience, obviously, for so many years, watching people lose either best friends or loved ones or items? And how do you see that? What's your perspective on that?
Sure. I think firefighters come at this with a completely different attitude and approach. Um, just like in the real world, 90% of the calls we go on are truly not emergencies. They are, somebody calls 911 and to them it's an emergency, but to a firefighter, if it's not a life and death issue, if it's not a house burning down, it's not really an emergency. And so we categorize things that way. For example, I had to come up with new languaging to help me understand what we do. So we know there are tragedies and there bad things that happen, life and death issues. But then there's this whole litany of other things that happen to us in our lives, negative things. And the problem is our brain often hijacks us. So, I mean, my example that I always use is that we get stuck in traffic and we're going to be late for a meeting. So we start to get upset and we think, oh my God, if I'm late for a meeting, my boss is going to be angry. If my boss is angry, he's going to fire me. If he fires me, I'm going to go home. My husband or my wife is going to divorce me. I'm going to end up on the streets, right? And that's how our brain works, all in a millisecond. And so what we had to do was come up with different languaging to help explain the stuff that's not truly a tragedy, but our minds often hijack. So I use the word inconvenience, and I use that. That's my mantra. So when the pager goes off, and we're told this is a broken leg or somebody's stuck and needs help, to control the adrenaline rush, I say, well, this is just an inconvenience. It's not the end of the world. It's not a tragedy. So I can stay calm, and when you're calm, you're more creative. And I think that's the same with us in our lives, especially now during a pandemic. People are suffering. There's no doubt about it. People are suffering. It's going to be a long time before we're back to normal, but we have to be able to categorize what are true emergencies, what are true tragedies, and what are simply inconveniences.
How do you see the difference for yourself when you said that when you look at it as minor inconveniences, you deal with it differently? How about when you look at it as a tragedy? Then how do you deal with it?
I think what we're trained to do is a couple of things. We're trained and by experience to stay calm, right? And that is this kind of basic stuff. Like we teach firefighters that before you take someone else's pulse, take your own pulse, right? Remember that it's not your tragedy, it's not your emergency, it's someone else's emergency. We are there to help. We're not there to get kind of hooked into the panic and the adrenaline that might be going on in a truly bad situation. So a lot of it is about how we discipline, it's mental discipline. And a lot of it has to do with just experience, because when you see lots and lots and lots of bad stuff, you kind of learn to step back, do your job, not get emotionally hooked into it to the best you can.
What are some of the exercises that you do for yourself in order to create this calmness and obviously acknowledge your own pulse and see where you are? And then if you see your pulse is high and then you have to also help somebody else, what type of an exercise do you do just as a normal way of practice for yourself to be able to keep that calm? And then what do you do right at the time where something shows up and for you, you have to first calm yourself down in order to go and take care of somebody else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of it is, I think as firefighters or anybody who's a first responder, you have to have a practice that you can rely on and use regularly to deal with stress and to deal with the fact that we see things that most people don't see. So for example, my kind of daily practice is walking. So I walk every morning. It allows me to kind of stay in the moment, which is really important. It allows me to prioritize and keeps me calm. So that's kind of something that I put in. And I really recommend that people have some sort of practice right now, because it's a very stressful and very difficult time. In the moment, there are two things that we do, or I do. One is I really focus on my breathing. When we panic, we tend not to breathe very effectively. So I focus on taking 3 or 4 deep breaths before I go into any situation. In the book, I talk about standing inside the hula hoop, and that is an exercise that you're taught when you go to incident command school or an officer school. And the gist of it is, what they do is they simulate a scene, a bad crash or a house fire. They put a hula hoop down on the ground, and then you have to stand inside that hula hoop and stay there, no matter who is yelling at you, no matter who is screaming at you, no matter who is dying in front of you. And the reason is that you have to be able to stop and see the entire scene to get the entire picture of what's going on. And a lot of times in real life, something bad happens, and we get just sucked into it. We get what we call tunnel vision. We're not able to see the big picture. So we need to breathe, kind of stay inside that hula hoop, and kind of see the larger picture. So those are kind of disciplines that we learn as firefighters that kind of are applicable to anybody going through difficult times. I think the other thing I've learned is that it's okay to step back. A friend of mine who's a firefighter, who's a young guy who's 25 years old, and he went to, I think it was his first cardiac arrest caused by a drug overdose. And they started working the code, and lots going on, and he got a little overwhelmed. So he literally took a couple of steps back and just breathed, took a couple of deep breaths, kind of gathered his thoughts, saw that everything was okay, what they were doing, they're doing the best they could, then stepped in and did it, started working again. So I think the idea of, again, taking the time occasionally to kind of step back from what's going on and seeing the big picture is really important. So those are kind of my 3 strategies that I use in the moment.
I think it's beautiful what you said, because most of us, what we do is when we face something that appears dangerous, the automatic reaction is act immediately without necessarily looking at the bigger picture. And what I'm hearing from you is when we stop ourselves from an automatic action and actually hold ourselves in the space so that we could see the bigger picture. And with the information of the bigger picture, then look at what is the, like strategize, what is the appropriate action that we actually need to make now in order to move to the next level, And that's
Right.
what I'm hearing that you are trained to do. You
Exactly.
look at the bigger picture and see what is first that needs to be done in order to save life, and then the next thing and the next thing. In
Right.
your book, you suggest inviting more difficulty actually to your life on a regular basis in order to, it's like skill building and creating some sort of like a resilience and all of that. Can you share more about that suggestion, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with understanding this, that especially in the United States, in the first world, we live inside of cultures that teach us that comfort and ease are what the world is about, right? And our culture, our civilization is really kind of designed to kind of push away the kind of fundamental drum beats of life. And that life is short, it's incredibly fragile, and this is all we have. So we live under these illusions that we have all the time in the world, that life should be comfortable and should be easy. And that's a wonderful thing. Who doesn't want to be comfortable, right? But the fact is that life is not comfortable. And as we're seeing now, in March, all of us had plans, we had calendars, and we had to throw everything away, right? Because we're in the middle of this pandemic. So the fundamental fact about life is that it is hard, it is tough, it is short, and we have to be tough in order to really exist and to thrive here. But we're not taught that. We're not taught that. We're taught a lot of interesting things, but we're not taught kind of the fundamental things about being alive and understanding that this is the only moment we have, and about that we have to be tough. So my suggestion is that we need to invite difficulty in our lives in order to prepare for life, right? In order to prepare for life. And I'm a soccer coach. That's one of my other gigs. And so I've always been in sports and involved in sports, and working with young athletes is analogous to how we are as individuals. A 15-year-old or a 13-year-old doesn't really know the difference between pain and inconvenience, right? So part of athletics is to teach them that they can endure more, they're tougher than they think, and really push them to where they're really, really uncomfortable physically. And it's the same thing we need to do in our lives. We need to kind of understand that the illusion of comfort is harming us in some ways. We need to go out and experience difficulty, whether it's athletic difficulty or learning a new language that makes us uncomfortable. All kinds of things in the world exist for us to experience being uncomfortable. And when we experience difficulty, when we kind of push through small things, we're better able to deal with the larger issues of life that are coming at us. I think the one thing we know is that the guarantee that the universe makes is you're going to experience tragedy, you will experience trauma, and either you can prepare for it or you can be shocked by it. And so and being a firefighter, of course, teaches us every day. So my remedy is, let's learn to be tough now. Let's learn to deal with difficult stuff now, and be suspicious of being comfortable. Go ahead.
You certainly have invited by volunteering firefighter. Obviously, you're inviting this every day to your life. And with that, you're gaining a lot of skill. You're not waiting for life to bring it to you. You put yourself in positions that are actually life and death situation, a loss situation, and making decisions every single minute. Real quick, tell me, you have this concept of there's only one question that you have to ask yourself. If the minute you have to really make a tough decision based on all the other thought processes that flood you and all the emotions that flood you, what would be the one question that we should ask ourselves when we are faced with a tough decision?
It's so important. And the question right now that I think we should always be asking ourselves when we come to a choice point is, what is the bravest thing I can do? in this moment, what is the bravest thing I can do? Think about your life. Go back to high school, right? Think about all the choice points we came to, the decision points we came to, where we chose to do the most comfortable thing. Not ask that person out on a date, right? Choose not to take tough classes in school, and choose the simple ones or the easier ones. Not being willing to fail, being afraid to fail, being afraid of rejection. All those choice points will come because we don't ask ourselves, what is the bravest thing I can do, right? We just automatically, unconsciously go with what is the most comfortable thing. And our lives are made of those choice points. And if we always choose to do the comfortable thing, right, we are never going to live up to our full potential and to realize why we're here on this planet. And I think we put ourselves in jeopardy of being, when life does ask us how strong you are, how tough you are, we put ourselves in jeopardy of not being able to answer that question effectively.
Yes. What I also hear from you is that, sometimes we take either comfort for granted or look at it as an entitlement, like as if it should be. And
Exactly.
And what I hear from you is that's just not true. That is an illusion. That life is going to have its up and down. If we were still living on trees as human being were, we would have to deal with life and death issues every single day.
Exactly, right.
And just because we created as, human species, different systems in order to create comfort, that's just something we created. That doesn't mean life doesn't have its ups and downs. 1 minute, if there's anything that we haven't said and you really, really want people who are listening and watching this to know.
I think so. I think the one thing I want people to know is that we're going to get through this, the pandemic, the recession, the racial justice issues that we're having right now. We're going to get through this. I think that chaos comes before something's born, right? Chaos always precedes something being born. And we're witness to that and we're part of that, but we will get through this. Quickly, my grandparents were both born in 1900, and they went through the First World War, the flu epidemic, the Great Depression, the Second World War, the Communist Scare, the polio epidemic, right? The Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement. And they survived, they got through all of that, and we can too. We're the same people. We have their genes, we have their stories, and we're born to thrive.
Thank you, everyone. Hersch Wilson. Please go get the book, Firefighter Zen, A Field Guide to Thriving in Tough Times. Thank you so much for being on my show. Where can people find you?
I have a website, Hersch Wilson, HERSCH, Wilson.com. And then I'm on Facebook at Hersch Wilson Author.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And for everyone who's with us, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, create a great time for you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine. Do you feel stuck at home? Do you feel stuck in your life? Well, don't you wish that you could just take your hand across the nightstand and hit the life reset button? Well, I've got news for you. Here it is, Life Reset, the awareness integration path to creating the life that you want, with a simple process, 12 questions, and a process to go deep inside and look at where you are, creating an awareness of the present moment, healing the past, and envisioning a future, and giving you tools in how to take care of yourself and be a whole and complete person as you go into the future. Here it is. Go to Amazon.com or Foojan.com and get your copy now. This is the time you can actually take care of yourself. You deserve it.